Okay, so I'm just thrilled. I'm thrilled to have so many of you with us today. As Thomas mentioned, over 400 people from around the country, primarily here in Arizona. And those of you who know me know how proud I am of the state and the work that we do here. So I'm going to be talking to you about a variety of strategies and really a variety of glimpses into the economy. We're going to be talking from micro to macro and really thinking about your role in the context of the greater economy here. So I liked what Clayton said about grit and optimism. And one thing I just want to remind you all in the middle of the incredible, difficult, and turbulent year that we have gone through together, that if you're here with us right now, you really are a survivor. And it may not have been perfect. In fact, I'm pretty sure that it wasn't perfect. Some of you may be thriving right now, and some of you may be hanging on by a shoestring, but damn it, you're here. And the bottom line is we're in this together. So I really want to thank you. So I'm going to start by talking about the important role that local businesses play, and that local economies need deep partnerships. I'm going to be reminding you again and again that relationships matter most. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we're doing overall, and really name the fact that there's a tendency in the media to lump small businesses as one sector, and it really is a disservice because local ownership really means economic opportunity. And that economic opportunity has a million different shapes and forms. And so, sure, we may tend to have a fewer number of employees, but that's not the only way we measure who we are. And there's so many different types of small businesses. And then I'm going to be touching base on spending habits. I think there's a real tendency in our society to think about your business as an isolated bottom line, when in fact you're a piece of a much bigger economy. And so I'm going to encourage you to think in the macro. And then I'm going to address how our economic systems are broken, and more importantly, what each one of us can do about that. And then, the last 18 years of my life have been dedicated to this work specifically. And we're going to be talking about lessons learned and how we're going to move forward. The first thing I want to call out is how very deeply proud I am to work in partnership with all of you. And, when the crisis hit, I saw chefs open up their walk-in freezer and give all of their food to their employees because they didn't have anything else to offer. And the bravery of facing the unknown, if you can think back to how we were all feeling a year ago today, and the uncertainty, and being able to give, and the business owners who called and said, my business is dead in the water, but I'm going to try to hang on, and I wonder if there's something I can do to help someone else. I want to share with you a woman in the middle of the chaos when we were doing all of our distribution. Some of you may not know, we ended up distributing nearly $12 million in direct assistance in the form of small grants to help people pay their rent and help them pay their bills. One of the women I randomly called, she came in as an applicant. She had lost 90% of her business in a 2-week span. The same week she was diagnosed with breast cancer, a single mother with 2 kids under 5 years old at home. And that woman just recently sent me an email and said, I am so proud to pay this money back, and I hope that you'll pay it forward to help someone else in our community. And I share that story with you as a story of inspiration. This woman, through her darkest days, came back in a year and asked us to take that money and reinvest it with someone else in the community. And that is what being a local business owner is. It is about, how can I be a part of something bigger than just myself? So one thing that I want to remind you all about is that the economy needs us in order to work. And so oftentimes when people talk about buy local or supporting local businesses, there can be a tendency to think that we're gonna tell this sort of boo-hoo story, right? That you need to support us because we're mom and pops or we're smaller businesses. And I think it's critically important to understand that the economy actually needs us. The economy doesn't function without us. And so I think we'll talk a little bit more about why that is and how the economy works. But first, I want to start by reminding you what you need to do with your business in order to be competitive and in order to stay relevant. So again, collaboration is key and relationships matter the most. So I want to remind you with your business, don't be afraid to be different. Don't be afraid to do things a little bit off the beaten path. You know your customers best. Do it your way. If you want to set up something completely different, if you want to approach something differently, go for it. You have the opportunity to do that. Remind yourself how that employee training is critically important. You can compete with the big guys because you can have better customer service that's about an experience, customer service that makes people feel important and remembered. Okay, having deeper expertise on staff. Every single one of us can compete by having deeper expertise on staff. Be convenient and consistent. You know, this is more for our retailers and our restaurants and our consumer facing businesses, but be convenient and consistent. And I'm going to tell you a couple stories focused on these last few bullet points here. Always go the extra mile. Okay. And I tell this wonderful story. A friend of mine that was in Globe, she used to teach Fortune 500 companies about customer service, and now she runs an inn, a bed and breakfast in Globe. She told a great story. I'll keep it simple, but she said, one time I was going home, I hit the grocery store, it was late at night, and I had the simplest Kimber. I needed bread, milk, cheese, and eggs. And I went into the grocery store and they didn't have any of it. And I was outraged. I went home and I sent that manager a nasty gram. Again, small town. She knew the manager, sent the manager a note saying, you know, you call yourself a grocery store, pretty much reading them the riot act. She was tired at the end of the day. Well, that manager got that email about 45 minutes later. And I'm going to give you a minute to think about what he did. Okay, but what he did was he showed up on her doorstep with her groceries. Simple list: bread, milk, cheese, eggs. He picked them out and he hand delivered them. She was telling that story 3 years later, and now I'm telling that story 3 years later. That is the level at which local business is going to need to compete in order to survive. That is the high water mark. That is our goal. Now, do you think she's a customer for life? There's no doubt. There's no doubt. He told her, he said, I had 3 people call in sick. I'm so sorry. I tried to stop everyone at the door. I didn't have anybody to stock the shelves. I tried to grab everybody, but apparently I missed you. And I really deeply apologize. That's transformative work. And that's how to build community. And that's the level at which we're going to need to perform. I want to remind every one of you to tell your story. Too often we tell what we do and not why we do it. Remember why you're passionate about what you do and tell that story. More and more people, and I'm talking about boomers, and I'm talking about millennials, and I'm talking about Xers, they want to know who they're doing business with. Relationships matter most. And coming out of this pandemic, people want to know their money is going to help individuals in the community. So don't forget, when they click on About Us on your website, it better tell who you are, and it better tell why you do what you do. Why are you passionate about it? And then finally, invest in your people. This is critically important. If people have survived with you, and I know there's so many touching stories out there about owners who just did everything to drop on top of their employees and protect them, shield them in any way that they could. Don't lose sight of that. Your people are the most important. So how are we doing overall? I always, people call, how are small businesses doing? Well, the answer is we're all over the place. Tech, manufacturing, housing, real estate, absolutely booming, have never been doing better. It's shocking how great they're doing right now. Restaurant and retail are not out of the weeds yet. Some are thriving. Some happen to be in industries that people really needed during the pandemic, others not so much. On the restaurant side, those that had wonderful outdoor dining spaces are doing much better than those that did not. Um, Go out of your way. Order out with a restaurant that doesn't have an outdoor patio. I can guarantee you they need your money the most. Business to business services are split. Some have successfully pivoted and others have not. And generally, business to consumer, those that invested in technology are doing well. Critically important. Those who couldn't afford it are falling even further and further behind. We need to do everything we can to support those businesses and help them invest in technology so that they can too stay competitive and stay afloat during the turbulence that's still ahead of us. So now I'm going to shift and we're going to start talking a little bit more about the macro, understanding the role that local ownership plays within the context of the greater economy. And I know some of you are drilled down and you're thinking about your business, but your business can't be successful, and it certainly can't be as successful as we would all want it to be if it's being bogged down in an overall economy that's not recovering at the pace that it should, and in which everyone has an opportunity to be successful. So at Local First Arizona, we believe that our businesses need to, that our governments need to invest more in retention and expansion strategies. That means knocking on your door and finding out how you're doing and how we can be, how they can be helpful to you. Making sure you have the tools and resources to grow, hire new people, and not just focus on business attraction. Right now, we're so focused on getting companies to relocate to Arizona that we could have a company like an Infusionsoft 10 years ago that didn't have the opportunity to have someone come and ask them, what do you need? How can we help you? And they went on to create hundreds upon hundreds of jobs, and they did it in their own way and with their own dollars and with their own bootstrapping. Meanwhile, we took our government money and paid some company in California to relocate here. We need to shift. It can't be one or the other, but we need to shift and focus more on retention and expansion. It's a better bang for the buck. And frankly, it builds more hometown pride. We need to be telling the story of those fantastic businesses that grew right here in Arizona. We need to focus on reducing economic leakage, the dollars that are exiting our economy through extractive systems, the online shopping, the dollars that leave our economy and never come back. They also leave our communities and never come back. We need to focus on plugging those leaks. And we do that by making sure people have an opportunity to spend locally at every turn. We need to diversify wealth. We can't just have a winner and loser society. We need to diversify wealth. And we can't just continue to say it's okay to have that 1% and everybody else fend for themselves. We need to be thinking about the entire system and make sure that we're working together. So we envision deep and intentional investments in entrepreneurship across the board, and in particular, entrepreneurship and entrepreneurs of color. We need to move our money into banks that lend to small businesses just like yours. If your bank did not help you when you needed a PPP loan, if they didn't jettison you to the front of the line, you need a new bank. And I'm going to say that again. If you were standing in line for an eternity at a big bank waiting for them to help you get the money that you needed to survive and they weren't there for you, you need a new bank. It is not okay to just keep my money. It's okay that you abused me. It's okay that you mistreated me. No, you need a new bank. We need policies that level the playing field. We don't live in a society that has a level playing field for me and you to be able to compete. And in order to have a strong, maximum potential economy, we need a level playing field where everyone has an opportunity. And we need to amplify our small business voices, and we need to lead Arizona to a strong and resilient economy. So I want to call out that our economic systems are broken, all right? Inequities are widening at an accelerated pace. Whether we want to talk about the rural-urban divide, or if we want to talk about the racial wealth gap, or the gap between corporate and local, economic systems are broken and these inequities are widening at an accelerated pace. So we need to focus on policies that enable local economies. So that may sound like, well, of course, local economies exist, but we need policies that enable local economies to exist within the context of what is a very globalized society. Now, we don't have to be anti-global. We need to enable local economies, which means that there are many, many policies that have favored the global over the local that need to be addressed. So how do we coexist? Okay, we've got decades of economic policies that have favored global over local. Those policies have led to the biggest of big banks who are no longer interested in lending in small increments, the size increments that you and I may need, say $25,000 to $200,000. Those are unattractive loans to be making, right? The loans by and large for the big banks are millions of dollars. So that has limited our access to capital, and it has stunted the growth of our small businesses who may not be able to grow at the pace that they could or potentially should be growing. We actually have policies that support monopolies. We need to counter that narrative and remind our leaders that diversified economies work best. There are reasons we put into place policies to break apart monopolies. They're not good for a competitive environment. The simple policy that low bid wins does not factor in the deep value that local businesses bring. Maybe it's 1% more to spend local, but look at how much more that local business is rooted in our economy and gives back time and time again, whether it be spending locally, giving charitably locally, showing up and volunteering for the school board, whatever that might be. It needs to be factored into the value of a government contract. It can't just be the cheapest price wins. That cheap is costing us a fortune. We need to measure success by growth, or we need to stop measuring success by growth alone. We can't just simply think that our economy is going to be okay if our only measuring stick is on growth. We have to measure health and well-being of our communities and our small business owners if we're going to be successful overall. We need to limit corporate protections, that anonymity that corporations need to come forward, or that they can come forward and influence policy, and we never actually know who they are, who's behind that corporation, and how are they making those demands. They need to be accountable to our communities and be identified as the people that they actually are. And then there's a proposal that's been circulated over the last couple of years to cut back on the Community Reinvestment Act. The Community Reinvestment Act requires our banks to take a portion of their profits and reinvest them back into our communities. As you've heard time and time again, these banks have been very, very profitable over time, and the Community Reinvestment Act requires them to give back into projects that fund affordable housing, charitable organizations across our state. We don't need to cut back on the CRA. We need to make sure that we elevate our voice, and we're talking about the importance of the CRA to the overall success of our economy. So to counter these narratives, we need to be looking at alternative ownership models. You know, in our rural communities today, so many owners are facing retirement and they can't find buyers for their businesses. What we do at Local First Arizona is we've partnered with an organization called Project Equity that steps in and can help the employees of that business put together the funding and a strategy plan to actually buy that owner out when they're facing retirement, which serves two purposes. It diversifies the ownership and the revenue, but also that rural town that can't afford to lose even one more business has an opportunity to keep that business going. We've diversified ownership and wealth in that community, kept those jobs, kept that business going. We need to be looking at all kinds of alternative ownership models. We need to collectively move our money into the banks that were there for us through thick and thin, the banks that helped us the fastest, get the money we needed to keep our businesses afloat. Move your money. Tell your friends and family to move your money. We only have, you may have seen in the Business Journal last week, front page, Arizona's barren banking scene. We have 12 locally owned community banks left, and then we have our credit union partners move that money and get it into their hands, because they're the ones who are committed to Arizona's long-term success, health, and well-being. We need to enforce existing antitrust laws. Those laws, again, are there for a reason. When companies get too big, they suck all the dollars out of the economy, and they're no longer, they don't have any competition, right? That is bad for the overall market. We can't just have 4 companies owning all the airlines. Our prices are going to go up. Antitrust laws are essential, and they exist. They just haven't been enforced. We need to all be thinking about local procurement. Our role in a local economy, looking at how we spend our money, actually impacts the health and well-being and general wealth of our community, and keeps dollars coming back to us. And then we need to finally enable local investments. If I want to invest in my local, and I mean invest in my local farmers market, I should be able to do that. There are laws that block us from local investment, and instead they channel us all toward the stock market, toward big global investments. We need to have the same opportunities to invest locally should we choose to. So I'm just going to touch on these concepts because they're so important to all of us as local business owners. 55% of the nation's largest corporations, including well-known brands, paid nothing in federal income taxes in 2020. Now, this is an opportunity for us to point out that this notion that if we invest the best in the biggest, that will somehow come down and benefit all of us, right? We're failing to see that. There's not a clearer example of why this doesn't work. Those dollars are being harbored offshore. They're not coming back. And those companies are equally using our roadways and our infrastructure. We need to hold them accountable. We, as the middle class, we, as the local business owners, are paying the lion's share into the systems that help us maintain our quality of life. We need to be asking hard questions and making big demands. So our lessons learned at Local First Arizona, I think it's really important that we reflect back on the many, many years of work that we've done. And some of the top line things that came up for me as I was putting this presentation together for you today. Case studies are critical. We need to prove there's a better way. We do it day in and day out, me and you and all the small businesses listening today, but we need to prove there's a better way, that we can lead with caring about our communities, caring about each other, that we can't just live our lives thinking about our only measurement is growth, and our only measurement is through the lens of an isolated bottom line. Case studies are critical to tell our story. I will tell you, the mainstream media does not comprehend the complexity of our economy, and we need to elevate our stories again and again and again. Entrepreneurial thinking, right through the pandemic, it was so important, this nimble entrepreneurial thinking that you used when you started your company. And maybe you've been there a long time and you had to go back and dust it off. You've been doing it for a long time and you had to rethink what you were doing. The most success that we saw was the bravery to cut a piece of your business that wasn't performing well and to invest in another part of your business where you were starting to see opportunities, right? It takes bravery time and time and time again. And I said this at the beginning, I've never been more proud to work in a community like this one. I saw the most amazing business owners and entrepreneurs raise their hand and say, how can I help? They pivoted bravely into stepping up and creating everything from, hand sanitizer to mask making and everything in between. That entrepreneurial thinking was essential to getting us through that. And then finally, you may not want to hear this from me this morning, but systems thinking has to be a priority. You are in an ecosystem and you are a dot in that ecosystem. And it's dangerous to only be thinking about yourself without thinking about all of the things that influence your business, all of the things in the economy, 2 years ahead, what should you be looking at? And then the day-to-day of being in your community. and how are you contributing, and looking at your neighbor who may have a panicked, drowning look on their face, and what is your role in being able to reach out and help them be successful too. So a case study that I want to share with you, this one it's an older study. We did this several years ago, but we looked at the purchasing habits of Copper Point Mutual. Their CEO at the time had heard me talk and said, you know, we buy some locally, but I think we could be doing better. We went in and studied what they were purchasing, and we showed that they were essentially sourcing about 42% of their goods and services locally, and we were able to get them all the way up to 82% by what we call import substitution. Going out and finding other local companies, from shredders to office supplies to insurance companies, that were able to come in and help them source more locally. And then we were able to come in and say, well, what does that mean? All right, so now they're sourcing 82% of their goods and services locally. So number one, they spent $100 million, but we proved it had a $500 million impact on Arizona's economy by the time those dollars recirculated. There were 7 times more jobs supported. So 518 employees at that time worked at that company. We proved they were indirectly supporting 3,600 jobs just by the way they were sourcing. And now a lot of people will come in and say, yeah, but they had to spend more money to do that. No, they didn't. We saved them 1% on their annual budget. It just took the time and effort to come in and look for local alternatives. Don't just be a local business and think to yourself, well, I'm going to source from all these big global companies, but you better source from me. No, practice what you preach. Source from other local companies. Now, at this point in my talk, at a graphic design conference a couple of years ago, this was back when we were in person, I had a woman who was in the front row who slapped herself in the forehead, boom, hard enough that I actually heard it. And I stopped my talk. And I said, ma'am, are you okay? And she said, yeah, I'm just mad at myself. And I said, why? And she said, I have a small graphic design firm. I used to have 7 employees, and today I have 5 employees, and it looks like tomorrow I'm going to have 4. And it never occurred to me until right now that I've been sourcing all of my goods and services from big national companies that are never going to hire me. Big national companies that are never going to hire a small graphic design firm in the state of Arizona. And she thought to herself, I better get out there and start sourcing from other companies that might actually need my services. Suddenly, she became aware of the fact that it's not about her own isolated bottom line and why am I not doing better, but rather I'm spending all of this money with companies that'll never hire me. I need to spend with my neighbors. I need to develop relationships so that I am remembered when somebody needs graphic design services. And I don't care if you're talking about $12 a month. Get out there and build a relationship with somebody else that's part of this network. We're the largest local business coalition in the country. Surely we can help you find somebody. If you want to source more locally, contact us about Source AZ. We'll look at your contracts and we'll help you find somebody else that can compete on that price where you have an opportunity to build a relationship. So now I'm going to help you think about systems, right? Now, we were hired to go into one of my favorite small towns to help them look at their tourism numbers. Now, bear with me. You're thinking, now she's talking about tourism, but bear with me. I'm going to get you thinking about systems, okay? You're part of a system, whether you want to be or not, you're part of a system. So this community hired me because their tourism numbers were dropping, even though they won Best Small Town in America. Their Yelp reviews had dropped from a 4.75 stars down to a 3.25 in a 6-month span. That is a significant drop. Few searches on TripAdvisor, and I saw bad review after bad review. I had a bad experience over and over, and I'm thinking, wow, I grew up coming to this community. That's not like them. What's going on? So we got hired, went in, did a study. I started knocking on doors, asking our frontline businesses, our restaurants primarily, but also our retailers. And I said, hey, what's the latest? What's going on with you? And they said, man, we're having a hard time hiring. We're having a really hard time hiring. In fact, most of our workforce has vanished, and I can hire high school kids or people that have addiction problems. And neither one is faring very well for me. I'm trying to help people with their addiction problems, but these restaurateurs are juggling all these problems. So I went further into the community. I started asking questions. Well, what happened to the workforce, right? This community was an artist community for years. Since I was younger, we all knew this was an artist community. Well, Airbnb had moved into this community 6 months ago and replaced all of the long-term affordable housing stock with short-term rentals. They had then unknowingly completely displaced the artist community, and the artist community were the ones who were able to live as artists by supplementing their income as servers. And they had jobs in the retail store. That was their frontline workforce. So here you have a community that is thinking they have a tourism problem, when in reality, they have an affordable housing problem. In fact, it's a crisis. The people who worked in those businesses could no longer afford to live in that community, and they'd been displaced, and therefore, you're starting to see worse and worse online reviews, which is then impacting their tourism, which impacts all of us. Fewer dollars coming into that community, more dollars leaving that community. That is an affordable housing crisis. We're seeing that across Arizona, right? We need to be aware of how these crises are impacting our communities. Right now, if you're driving between Cottonwood and Sedona and you happen to look out and you think, oh, wow, gosh, there's tons of people camping. The weather must be beautiful. No, that is the workforce from Sedona that are living in camper vans because they cannot afford to live in that community anymore. So you need to be thinking about systems, to be thinking about how your community, how your role is impacted by the community around you and what role you can make. So now I'm going to give you an example of how our systems thinking internally at Local First Arizona played out in real life in the middle of the crisis. So first and foremost, the city of Phoenix, kudos to them. Kudos to them for saying, we're going to take some of our CARES Act money and we're going to feed COVID impacted families. They responded nimbly and they responded quickly. Then they responded positively when we said, don't just take that money and hire one big global company to make those lunches, to feed those COVID impacted families. Don't do it. Give it to us and let us run it through our economy. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, let me take that money and work with my team to come together. And we're going to put together an RFP, a request for proposals, and we're going to hire farms and we're going to hire restaurants to make that food. And so that's exactly what we did. And I will tell you that we have an incredible team at Local First Arizona who worked diligently to work with 14 different farms and 45 different restaurants to take the same amount of money and put their teams to work. And we created more than 50,000 meals. We supported all of these different restaurants. We required local food to get into the meals and the local chefs to be able to make those meals. And there's so many complexities there. You had a farmer that might not have had as many mushrooms as they thought that day, or they might not have had enough broccoli for the chef to be able to make it work. And the chef was able to pivot and still produce the number of meals that they needed to go out the door, to go over to UMOM, or to go over to Native American Connections or the Indian Center, to be able to get the food out into the communities that needed it the most. So this is a case study, frankly, a case study that Local First Arizona has waited for a really long time to demonstrate this is how we invest in a crisis. This is how we lean on each other. This is how we keep ourselves working. And we work together as a community to wisely invest the dollars we have to maximize the impact. We fed just as many families as we wanted to, and we did not spend even $1 more. So this is the power of how the local economy could and should work when we weren't just thinking about what's the simplest way or what's the cheapest way. We have to ask ourselves, what is the best way that we can make an impact in our community? So the final thing I want to leave you with is our most recent announcement is we launched the Arizona Economic Recovery Center. You may remember, those of you who've been in business long enough, remember after the last economic downturn, Arizona came in dead last for economic recovery, and we measure economic recovery by the length of time it took us to reach pre-recession levels of economic activity. Part of the reason is we didn't have enough local banks churning money and reinvesting into our economy. We instead had deposited our money in banks that invested it elsewhere, right? We witnessed it. We said, just take our money and invest it somewhere else. The underlying message there is we're not worthy. And I'm here to tell you we are worthy, and we need to demand that our deposits are reinvested back into our local economy. So the Arizona Economic Recovery Center takes an equitable lens, and we're going to be aggregating all of the stimulus money that's going to be coming our way, and all of the increased number of federal, state, local, and foundation grants that are going to be coming out, and getting them distilled into simple, easy to understand opportunity sheets. They're like templates that are easy to read: who, what, why, when, where, understanding who can compete for those grants. And then we're going to offer the capacity building tools and resources to help those communities and those nonprofits that generally don't have an opportunity to compete. We're going to give them the opportunity to compete by increasing their capacity. We're going to send grant writers, facilitators, project managers, bookkeepers, and others to help them compete, to put together a competitive grant so that we've got money going into all 15 counties, that we've got money going into the communities that need it the most. This Economic Recovery Center, I would encourage you to go visit that website. Sign up for a weekly email list that talks about the grant opportunities that are available. We'll be talking also about micro loan opportunities that are available at affordable rates so that everybody has an opportunity to compete and be successful. So if you want to know more about the work that we're doing at the macro, I would really encourage you to sign up for our early responders list. Our early responders list takes a look at what's happening at the policy at the macro level and simply informs you. Under no circumstance do I expect that you will all agree with us 100% of the time, but at least you'll know what's happening at the macro. You'll stay informed, so you can sign up for an early responders list. So if there's somebody trying to undermine the Community Reinvestment Act, or if there's an opportunity to weigh in at the federal level to enforce antitrust laws, to break apart those companies and encourage competition and grassroots growth of our smaller entrepreneurs, we will keep you informed. We'll tell you where to send the letter, what are some of the bullet points you'll need to include in your letter. Let your voice be heard. So I would encourage you to get involved and stay in touch with us. Don't just join local first and sit back. Join local first and step up for your community. And I promise you, it will come back to you in the form of having a strong, deeply rooted local community and business.